Hello friends, it's Lex at LexReads. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. Now I have a lot of feelings about this new addition to the Hunger Games universe, but I have split this video up into first my general review, non-spoilery feelings, and then at this timestamp, which I'll also put down in the description in case you were just interested in my spoilery thoughts. That's where spoilers will begin. I'll remind you again before I say anything spoilery, just so if you are not ready to hear any spoilers, you can scooch on out of here. But without further ado, let's just get into my feelings on this one. Oh boy. Okay, so The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is book 0 in the Hunger Games trilogy. It's a Hunger Games prequel in which we follow an 17-year-old Coriolanus Snow, who is the president in the Hunger Games trilogy, and we follow him doing his last assignment at the academy, which is basically a prestigious private high school, in which he and 23 other seniors, the equivalent of a senior, have been chosen and selected to be mentors in the 10th annual Hunger Games. This is the first time that mentors have existed, so we get to watch Coriolanus and the other teenagers navigate this changing, evolving Hunger Games. And Coriolanus, he has been selected to be the mentor for the District 12 female Lucy Gray, which he sees as kind of a slap in the face because, he takes pride in his name and everyone has written off District 12. But very quickly, Lucy Gray finds herself kind of adored by the Capitol, and this is marketed as kind of like Snow's villain origin story. I don't necessarily think that's fair. I think this book was marketed different than it actually is. Today, when I was watching Elena the Great, her spoil-free discussion, which is about all of the political theory in this book, which was really interesting and very good, and I cannot summarize it nearly as well as she did. So I will link her video down below if you're interested in the political theory of this book. But I agree with what she said in that video. She calls it it's more of a political thriller than it is a standard villain origin story. So I think that's something to be aware of. I don't necessarily think that the marketing for this book is the most accurate in the world. Alrighty, did I like this book? I did like this book. It was not by any means my perfect Hunger Games book. It was not my favorite book I've ever read. I went back and forth. I'm actually recording this 2 days after I finished reading the book because I was mulling over what I wanted to rate it, and I settled on a 4 out of 5 stars. So that's me saying that I really, really did enjoy this book. This book was not what I expected it to be, and honestly, I think it's better the way that it is. I'm glad that it is not what I expected it to be, because I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much if it had been how I assumed it was going to be. As I'm sure you're not surprised, I am in love with Suzanne Collins' writing. I think it's, in a lot of ways, kind of dry and expositional, but I like that. As I've said in a few videos, I'm not necessarily one for loving superfluous writing, although kind of depends. But this, as far as writing style goes, it felt to me a lot like how the first Hunger Games book felt, except it isn't in first person. It's in third person limited, following Coriolanus, which adds a little bit an extra degree of separation that isn't present in the Hunger Games, but narratively, I don't think it feels like any of the other books. I expected to have finished this book and wanted to compare and contrast themes and ideas and stuff from the trilogy, but really, this feels so, it's related, of course, but it feels so separate to me in terms of the narrative than the other three books. So I'm actually not really going to be comparing it much to the original trilogy. Like I said, I don't think it's fair to compare this to any of the other Hunger Games books. Yes, so I liked the narrative style. I liked how she approached him, Coriolanus, because I think it's very easy to fall into this, I'm writing a villain origin story, and I want it to kind of, you want it to add depth to the villain. That's kind of the point of writing a villain origin story. But a lot of people try to make us sympathize, and they want to make the character really likable and sympathetic, and they want us to feel for them. And while I think there's definitely a place for that, I appreciate how she approached it, because in my opinion, there is no point in this book where you are genuinely supposed to sympathize with Snow. I think even in his hardest moments, in his most compassionate moments, I still don't think the intent was for us to vibe with him. And I didn't. And I know some people are a little bit annoyed about that, and I know some people think that she did try to make him really sympathetic, and I personally did not read it that way, and I disagree with them. Yes, I liked a lot of the supporting cast. In my spoilery section, I'm going through a little bit of a character breakdown, a mini character breakdown, where I'm going to be talking about some of the most important characters in this story. But what I think you should know in a non-spoilery way is that there are some really interesting, diverse, well and poorly developed side characters in this book. My favorite thing about this story is the way that we get to see a broader capital. The capital is a lot different than what we have seen in the Hunger Games trilogy. First of all, they are just coming out of the war. It's been 10 years since the war ended. So it's very vastly different than what we're used to seeing, and it adds a lot of depth to the capital as a society, and I really enjoyed that. That was my favorite part of the story. Things that I didn't like about this book, things that I think could have been better about this book. I think the pacing in this book is really weird. The third act felt so out of left field to me. I was like, what is happening? And then I had no idea, I knew the entire first two acts where this story was going. And then the third act happened, and I was like, wait, what? And I felt like I had just been thrown out into the ocean and was, disoriented. And I was like, now I have no clue what's going on. Okay, so then, I don't know. The third act was hard for me to get through in a lot of ways. It took me longer than it took me to read the first two acts, which is weird, specifically because it's not as long as the middle act, but it felt really long, and it felt kind of out of place. I think the ending is really rushed. And I appreciate, like I said, how she wrote Snow, because a lot of times also in villain origin stories, we get to see, this one traumatic event that makes them the way that they are. And that is not how this book is. This book, we see, a very slow evolution from this conflicted but still not necessarily a good human teenager, and we get to see him slowly make more and more decisions that the further along we get, the less you can come back from it. So the more questionable, the more aggressive, the more violent or cruel his decisions become. But we don't get that dramatic, traumatizing moment, which I liked. That's something I liked. However, the last 15 pages of this book, like I said, the third act, I think if I had liked the third act more, I think this probably would have been a 5-star read, but just how the third act was written was really not my favorite thing she's ever done. Yes, so 4 out of 5 stars. Do I recommend this? Yes. I do not think this book is for everyone. I think this book is I think this book is written for a way more specific demographic of reader than the Hunger Games trilogy is. Like Elena said, once again, video link down below, this book is a lot of political theory. It's more thematically driven and less character driven, which I would say that while the political themes and the political theory is a really, really important aspect of the original trilogy, it's not the thing that was like most people's favorite thing about the trilogy, but that is what takes the driver's seat, the front seat in this story. So if you don't care as much about the political stuff, then maybe this is not for you. Yes, so there's my just general brief review of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Goodbye, friends. If you don't want any spoilers, now is the time to step on out. I'll give you a few more seconds and I'll just ramble for a minute. Not an actual minute, I'll ramble for a few more seconds. But moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about like character motivation, a character breakdown. I'm going to just briefly mention some of the like themes and symbols, and then some more spoilery what I thought about things. Yes, thumbs up. Let's do it. Okay. Welcome to the spoilery section of this video. I'm going to start by talking about characters because that's usually my favorite part of any given book. Coriolanus Snow. What a man. As I already said, I do not fundamentally with my whole heart believe that the point of this book was for us to sympathize with his character. I don't think she even tried to make him a sympathetic character, which I thought was fun and a little bit refreshing. He's kind of insufferable from like page 1 to page, 540? It's a long book. Like, I just think at the beginning, Coriolanus Snow is interesting because he's, at least at this age of 17 or 18, he is so intelligent, resourceful, manipulative, and charismatic above all else. He is so charismatic. So I think in the first 150 pages, if you aren't reading super between the lines, like very nitpicky, I think it's easy to think that he's actually pretty conflicted and compassionate and, dare I say it, even maybe like a little bit more likable than one would expect. That is not to say that he is that likable. I just think that in the first 100 pages, if you weren't reading really critically, I think it might seem like he's supposed to be likable. And I think that kind of mirrors, like that, it's a good way to explain his arc. Because at the beginning, we see him, and he's kind of, in a lot of ways, like questioning the importance of the games. Like many of the other students, they're trying to find their place in it. But above all, Snow's main motivating factor is furthering his own agenda. And if that means supporting the games, it means supporting the games. If it means killing someone, he might have to kill someone. Like, and at the beginning, it's written in a way that makes it seem like he's this kind of conflicted high school student that's just trying to further his, make his future better, which is fair and not untrue. But like I said, as the book continues on, we see him devolve and make more questionable and ruthless choices. And I think it's interesting because he wasn't made in the traditional, villain origin story way. He was always like that. He always had the capacity to do these manipulative, ruthless, cruel things. We just don't see him do it as much because it isn't going to help him as much at the beginning of the story as it is toward the end of the story. And he really ultimately is the kind of person who will do whatever it takes to further his agenda, to achieve his goals. And I guess what people might be thinking is supposed to make him sympathetic, we know, as we see, is that both of his parents are dead. They're basically poor as dirt. They've been eating, lima beans for years and years and years, and they can't even afford new clothes, or they can barely afford to keep their penthouse. But these things, the way that he talks about them and the way that he views them, it doesn't make him sympathetic, in my opinion. One thing I just want to mention, because I feel like I can't make this video without talking about it, this man-boy child is how I feel about how he talks about specifically Lucy Gray, but also every other person. He sees people, not as his equals, not as important, not as of value. The only thing that makes a person have value is how much they can do for him. He does not love Lucy, and I feel like that's something we should all be noticing and realizing, is that really between these two, it is not romance. It is purely manipulation. He likes Lucy because she can get him closer to his goal, and then when his dreams seem shattered, he's clinging to that. But he's so possessive every other damn paragraph, especially during the Hunger Games. He's like, she's mine. Is she thinking of me? She's mine. I own her. Lucy Gray belongs to me. And it was so uncomfy. But not only that, like, Sejanus, he only is kind to Sejanus when it furthers his own agenda. He uses Tigris, even though you could argue he feels a little bit guilty about that. I don't even think he feels guilty about that. Like, he uses Tigris. He sucks up to Dr. Gall because he thinks Dr. Gall has a lot to offer regarding his future and his studies, so he sucks up to her. He thinks Highbottom is out to get him, so he hates him. Like, it's just so, he is the most self-absorbed character. Blech. And that brings us to Lucy Gray, the female tribute from 12. Lucy is interesting because I think in a lot of ways her and Snow share some traits. We meet Lucy Gray at the reaping. She drops a snake down the mayor's daughter's dress, I believe. And she's wearing this colorful, like, rainbow performer's dress. She gets on stage and she sings. And she kind of captures everyone who's paying attention to the Hunger Games, which, at this point not very many do, but everyone in the Capitol that pays attention to the Hunger Games is kind of taken with her because she's so interesting. But the thing that I think is the most interesting about Lucy Gray is that, much like Snow, she is highly manipulative, very calculating, and very intelligent. They both look at the world in a way that's like, how is this going to further me? But Lucy Gray does it because she wants to get back home to her family. And in District 12, she does it because she wants to keep her family, the Covey, she wants to keep them afloat and take care of them. So hers is a little bit more selfless, whereas Snow's is ruthless. And I don't think Lucy Gray is ever ruthless in this story. I really, really liked Lucy Gray in the first 2 acts. I thought she was interesting and fun and funny and charismatic and, like, sassy, and she was fun to read about. And then in the 3rd act, I felt like she just kind of fell flat. I feel like we lost so much of her personality and she became really just a plot device, which kind of upset me because in the 1st act she was one of my favorite characters, and by the 3rd act I just didn't care that much about her. My favorite character, and in my opinion one of the most interesting characters in the book, was, I still don't entirely know how I'm supposed to say his name. I say Sejanus, but it might be Sejanus, it might be Sejanus. I'm going to say Sejanus. I'm sorry if that's not how you say it. He was born District 2, and spent his young adolescence, he was born in District 2 and spent his childhood in District 2. And at the time the book takes place, he's only been in the Capitol for about 10 years of his life, so he remembers District 2, and District 2 is home to him. But his family was brought to the Capitol after the war, and basically his dad is like a war profiteer. Has like a weapon. He deals in weapons. And Sejanus is Snow's foil throughout the story. So where Snow is calculating, Sejanus is hot-headed and emotional. Where Snow is cruel, Sejanus is genuinely compassionate. Where Snow does everything to further his own agenda and doesn't really care about anyone else, Sejanus is selfless and wants to help other people, especially people that he thinks are like him, aka the people that live in the districts. We see him go from this wary, not wanting to participate teenager to a genuine rebel sympathizer. which Sejanus and Snow, they mirror each other through the whole thing, and everyone views them as friends, but Snow, like, hates Sejanus, at least until the third act, where he likes him for, like, 2 pages and then is the worst again. But yes, I think you can learn a lot about both of the characters by looking at the opposite character, because, that's how foils work. It was really fun to read about. I loved that. Also, I think it's really, really sad that he has to mentor Marcus, who was his friend when he was a child. And also, I just feel kind of bad for him, because the entire content of this book, it, like, tears him apart mentally and emotionally. He just wants to help, and he feels really trapped, and it's very sad to see. Dr. Gall is the head game maker, and she is whack. There might be a few screws loose in her head, because she is just cruel. She is a cruel woman. She looks at people like they are pieces in a chess game. She likes to manipulate them. She likes to play with them like they're toys. She has this view of humanity where she thinks that humans are inherently violent and cruel and evil, and that our natural state is like chaos and war and yikes. And whether or not you or I as an individual agree with that, she posits one end of, like, the humanity spectrum. She, sees humans as vile and uses that to justify all of the horrible things that she does. She was one of my favorite characters to read about, because she was so interesting. And kind of, in a lot of ways, terrifying, and yikes. I also think that Dean is interesting, because through the whole story we can tell that something is weird about him, but we don't know until, like, the last, 15 pages or something, that the reason he dislikes Snow so much, and the reason he is so, like, he's on Morphling because he's trying to numb things, is because the games are his fault, he feels. He and Snow's father were partners for a project, and they got, like, a little bit drunk one night, and it was a project for Dr. Gall's class, and the dean was like, you know what, here's what we should do, and, like, created the idea of the Hunger Games. And then in the morning he was going to destroy it, because he was like, there's no way we can turn that in, like, that's really messed up. But Snow's dad had already turned in the assignment, and so he's living with the guilt of watching the Hunger Games happen, when he, I think, in a lot of ways foils Dr. Gall, where he doesn't think the Hunger Games are important or good or necessary, and he feels so guilty because he knows that he's had a big hand in the creation of the games. I could make an entire video on Tigress, but I'm just going to say that I think Tigress is also one of the most interesting, cool characters in this story, and the fact that Tigress is a Snow makes Mockingjay so much more interesting. And I just reread the series, and I'm kind of bummed, because I might just go back and specifically read the Tigress scenes, because I think it would be fun to read that section of the book again with this background knowledge of, like, Tigress being a rebel sympathizer, but you can tell the whole time that she's kind of sad about it. It's because her cousin, whom she loved so much growing up, is this evil President Snow, and she knows that he has to be stopped, and she wants the games to be stopped, and she wants a better world, but, like, that's her family, and I think that's really hard. There are some things that I would argue are some cool, important symbols in this book. The roses. I'm not going to actually talk about the symbolism that much, because I was too lazy to really actively write out all of my thoughts about them, because I'm a bad person. The roses and the rose scent, which is a symbol and throughout the trilogy, but also begins in this one, and we kind of see how the rose came to be. It's because it reminds him of his mother. Poison is a big symbol. We see the Capitol trying to, but, like, not really trying to, protect. There's rat poison in the zoo that all of the tributes are in. Lucy Gray uses rat poison at Snow's suggestion to kill other tributes in the arena. And then at the end, as we know in Mockingjay, Finnick says that the way that Snow has kept his political influence through his career is by murdering people, poisoning people who didn't agree with him, who were in opposition, who were threats in any political way. They got poisoned and they died. And we see that at the very end of this book in like the last page is the first time we see him purposefully poison another individual. And then, of course, one of the biggest symbols in the trilogy, but also in this one, is music or songs. I talked a little bit about music and songs in my Mockingjay reread discussion. I will link down below my Hunger Games, Catching Fire, and Mockingjay reread discussion book talks down below if you want to go see how I feel and some questions and some answers and some chat about those. Yes, but music arguably has a bigger place in this series in this book than it did in the original series. Sorry, flip that a little bit. And we get to see a lot of new songs that have various important meanings narratively to the story, but also we get to see that Lucy Gray wrote The Hanging Tree. So that adds a little bit more depth to the propo in Mockingjay when Katniss sings The Hanging Tree to Pollux. Because then we know that Snow was sitting there in his capital mansion, his president mansion, watching this propo of Katniss singing this song that was written by the girl that he claims to have loved when he was a teenager. And the same with the Meadow song, The Deep in the Meadow Under a Willow, that one. She sings it to, I don't remember if she wrote it or not, but she sings it to Maud Ivory in the third act of this book too. So we get to see both of the like really important songs in that series in this one, which I thought was cool. Yeah, so once again, I could do a whole video on the importance of music and music's role in the Hunger Games trilogy and also now this one. One of the things that I think is the most interesting, so Lucy's ballad, not the one that she writes and performs at the interview, but the one that was already written that she performs in the third act. I think it was interesting how it mirrored, narratively mirrored Lucy's story in a lot of way, specifically the end when they're trying to follow the footprints and find Lucy Gray, but eventually the footsteps disappear and there's this entire conversation when the Cubbies and Sejanus and Snow are in the woods talking about it. They're talking about like what happens at the end of the song, and some people are like, well, isn't it obvious she died? And then Maud Ivory is like, no, she turned into a bird and is flying away and like being free. And then at the end of the book, and Lucy Gray and Snow's big tumultuous falling out moment, I don't know what to say, we don't actually know what happened to Lucy Gray. Did Snow kill her? Did she die of natural causes? Is she still out there in the woods? Who knows? It's very open-ended, and so therefore up to you as the reader to decide how you interpret it, but I think it's cool how that mirrors the song, and that can be said about every song that Suzanne Collins writes, has a really important place in the narrative. Alrighty, some fun theme stuff that I liked. I liked the look at class, like I said in the non-spoilery part. My favorite thing about this book was the expansion of the capital, because in the trilogy, the capital is seen as this big, expansive place where everything is perfect and all of the people are affluent and rich and living in excess, while the districts are poor as dirt and struggling and being beaten into submission and being starved into submission and being scared into submission. But we see in this one that the capital also has the same setup where there's like the 1%, the top percent of earners that are living this affluent life in some excess, but less excess than we see in the original trilogy. But then also that there are families like Snow's family that have no money whatsoever. They are poor as dirt, and they are living exclusively off of what they already had. So I think it's interesting that added class layout in the Capitol itself. I really liked that. And as I touched on a little bit with Dr. Gall, there's so much discussion in this book about political theory and human nature and whether or not humans are inherently good or inherently evil or inherently kind or inherently violent. And then also ethics. What is justifiable? Do the ends justify the means? Are the Hunger Games justifiable in order to keep the districts in line? What is the purpose and the importance of the Capitol and this governmental system? Lots of political theory. It's just everywhere. It's just so deep. I actually have a couple sections marked off that I wanted to read out for y'all. I'm going to read you a section of the book. This starts on page 161. So this is right after Sejanus has freaked out and been like, you guys are evil, you have no right to starve people, to punish them for no reason, no right to take away their life and freedom. Those are things everyone is born with, and they're not yours for the taking. Winning a war doesn't give you that right. Having more weapons doesn't give you that right. Being from the Capitol doesn't give you that right. Nothing does. Oh, and I don't even know why I came here today. With that, Sejanus sprang up and bolted for the door. When he tried the handle, it wouldn't turn. He jiggled it and then confronted Dr. Gall. So that's like the lead up. But so then on the next page, I'm going to read this section. So, your emotions are running high, Dr. Gall told the class. I understand. I do. But you must learn to harness and contain them. Wars are won with heads, not hearts. I thought the war was over, said Livia. She seemed angry too, but not in the same way as Sejanus. Coriolanus guessed she was just peeved about losing her strapping tribute. Did you? Even after your experience in the arena? Asked Dr. Gall. I did, interjected I can't say her name, Lysistrata. And if the war is over, then technically the killing should be over too, shouldn't it? I'm beginning to think it will never be over, conceded Festus. The districts will always hate us, and we'll always hate them. So they're talking about like whether or not the Hunger Games are justified, and then Dr. Gall says, let's consider for a moment that the war is a constant. The conflict may ebb and flow, but it will never really cease. Then what should be your goal? You're saying it can't be won, said Lysistrata. Let's say it can't, said Dr. Gall. What's our strategy then? And then is some more stuff, and then she asks Snow what he thinks, and Snow says, we control it, he said quietly. If the war is impossible to end, then we have to control it indefinitely, just as we do now, with the peacekeepers occupying the districts, with strict laws, and with reminders of who's in charge, like the Hunger Games. In any scenario, it's preferable to have the upper hand, to be the victor rather than the defeated. Though, in our case, decidedly less moral, Sejanus muttered. So, I noted when I was reading that I thought this was like the real beginning of the end for Snow. I think this is a turning point for him as a character. And in a lot of ways, I also think that this scene is kind of like the moral of the story. And we do see the two different opinions. Like I said, you should go watch Elena's video because she talks a lot about the political theory and it's really interesting, and I think it ties into this scene so importantly, where Sejanus is of the opinion that all human beings are naturally equal, that we all have the same rights and we all deserve the same rights, and that having more than someone else or having beaten someone else doesn't give you the right to take away someone else's right. And then on the other side, you see like Snow and Dr. Gall who are like, no, we have to control them. So that scene was a big one for me. Yeah, so I think that section in a lot of ways kind of summarizes and explains some of the arguments that the book is making politically, like the two main political arguments. And then I'm going to read a couple more passages from the book. So this one is page 242 to 243, and this is when Dr. Gall and Coriolanus are talking. And I'm going to just read snippets of it. I'm not going to read like the whole 2 pages. But so it starts by her saying, "What was it like in the arena?" asked Dr. Gall. "Terrifying," said Coriolanus flatly. "It's designed to be." She checked his pupils, shining a light into each of his eyes. "What about the tributes?" The light hurt his head. "What about them?" Dr. Gall moved on to his stitches. "What did you think of them, now that their chains have been removed? Now that they've tried to kill you?" because it was of no benefit to them, your death. You're not the competition. And then he thinks for a minute, and then he says, I think I underestimated how much they hate us, said Coriolanus. And when you realized that, what was your response? She asked. I wanted them dead. I wanted every one of them dead. And then she basically is like, oh, I'm so glad you got to have such a transformative experience. And he's like, what the fuck? And so later, he's like thinking about how he murdered someone. And she said, and he's like, was it transformative? And he says, wasn't it? More than I could have hoped. I needed you to get Sejanus out of the arena, of course, but I wanted you to taste that as well, she said. Even if it killed me, said Coriolanus. Without the threat of death, it wouldn't have been much of a lesson, said Dr. Gall. What happened in the arena? That's humanity undressed. The tributes. And you too. How quickly civilization disappears. All your fine manners, education, family, background, everything you pride yourself on, stripped away in the blink of an eye, revealing everything you actually are. A boy with a club who beats another boy to death. That's mankind in its natural state. And then they talk about how it's technically a matter of opinion because there's nothing like actually proven about it. But that's, once again, like I said, just kind of showing how Dr. Gall looks at the world, and this is eventually where Snow gets. So at this point, he's not entirely convinced, but through the rest of the book, and then I guess we have to make the assumption that through the rest of his life until we get to the trilogy, like, he becomes of the same opinion that Dr. Gall is. And then the last section I'm going to read, and then I'm going to wrap it up for us. It's on page 434, and this is Lucy Gray and Snow talking. Lucy Gray leaned into his shoulder. Listen, I'm sorry if I upset you last night. I wasn't laying my daddy's death on you. We were both just kids when that happened. I know. I'm sorry if I overreacted. It's just, I can't pretend I'm someone I'm not. I don't agree with everything the Capitol does, but I am Capitol, and on the whole, I think we're right about needing order, said Coriolanus. The Cubby believe you're put on the earth to reduce the misery, not add to it. Do you think the Hunger Games are right? She asked. I'm not even sure why we do them, to be honest. But I do think people are forgetting the war too fast. What we did to each other. What we're capable of. Districts and Capitol both. I know the Capitol must seem hard line out here, but we're just trying to keep things under control. Otherwise, there'd be chaos and people running around killing each other like in the arena. This was the first time he tried to put these thoughts into words with anyone other than Dr. Gall. He felt a little unsteady, like a toddler learning to walk, but he felt the independence of getting on his feet as well. Lucy Gray drew back a bit. That's what you think people would do? I do. Unless there's law and someone enforcing it, I think we might as well be animals, he said with more assurance. Like it or not, the Capitol is the only thing keeping anyone safe. So they keep me safe. And what do I give up for that? She asked. And then they go on to talk about whether or not protection is worth giving up freedom, like what the balance should be between protection and freedom and safety and freedom. I think this is interesting because, once again, I think it kind of points out the two opposite sides of the political arguments that the book is making. So Lucy Gray is much like Sejanus, where she's like, she sees the good in people and she thinks all people have the right to be equal. And Snow is like, above all, I think we need order. Also, I would like to posit that Snow, we all know what Snow would choose to do in the shopping cart dilemma, which is the like modern discussion that's similar to the trolley problem, with the whole thing is like, you're in a parking lot, you have a shopping cart, do you put the shopping cart back in the corral even though it doesn't actually help you? And the whole idea is like whether or not you as a person will do what is objectively the right thing if you don't have someone there enforcing law. So yeah, I think we know where he would probably stand on that. Okay, so I've been recording this for 50 minutes. I've said a lot of things. I don't know if any of them were actually helpful. I have a lot more thoughts and feelings too. Please come down below and chat with me about any of the things. Like I said, I might later in the summer or later in the year do like a week of Hunger Games related video where I deep dive into some more specific nitpicky things in the trilogy and also maybe in this one too. So if you think that's something that would be cool, head down below and let me know. I did really like this book, and I think it's worth a read, especially if you are interested in any kind of political theory, if you like those philosophical questions about humanity, and if you like the Hunger Games. I think it's worth the read. Thank you for hanging out with me. I had a good time chatting about the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which has been out for a week, so it's available now, probably wherever books are sold. This week I have a good few videos coming out. I have a video tomorrow. I think I have 2 more videos this week. So if you want to come back and hang out with me, you should go down below, like, subscribe, so you can come back and talk with me some more. But other than that, that's all I have to say. Thank you for hanging out with me. This was a good time. I had fun talking about the book. Goodbye, friends.